Hello students, today we are going to discuss cross-pollination and the agents of cross-pollination. What is cross-pollination? Pollination is also known as allogamy. It is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of a flower to the stigma of a different flower of another plant. It may be of same or different species. Cross-pollination can also be called as genogamy in the condition when pollination takes place between two genetically different plants. If pollination takes place between two genetically different plants, then allogamy is termed as genogamy. And what are the devices for cross-pollination? What are the adaptations in the flowers which make them do cross-pollination? These are called outbreeding devices. Now first device for outbreeding is diclining. Diclining means a plant bears two types of flowers, male flowers and female flowers. On the basis of the presence of male or female flowers, the plant may be monoecious or dioecious. If both male and female flowers are present on the same plant, then it is called monoecious. It's called monoecious, like castor and maize. Castor and maize. In such plant, in monoecious plant, there is no chance of autogamy, but there may be chance of geitonogamy, because geitonogamy is the transfer of pollen grain from anther to stigma from another flower but on the same plant. Dioecious. Dioecious means both male and female flowers are present on two different plants. That means one plant has either male flowers or female flowers. That means there is compulsorily there will be cross pollination. Such flowers are called unisexual flower. So if there is unisexual flower, then there is compulsorily the chance for cross pollination, like papaya. Papaya is a dioecious plant, isn't it? Now another condition for cross pollination, another device, that is second one, dichogamy. Dichogamy means anther and stigma mature at different times. That means they do not synchronize with each other. The maturation of anther and stigma is not synchronized. Sometimes anther mature earlier, sometimes stigma mature earlier. If anther mature earlier, this condition is called protoandry, like in salvia, clerodendron, sunflower, rose, etc. And protogyny, proto means first, gyne means gynoecium, gynoecium means female reproductive part, that is stigma. Stigma mature first. If stigma mature first, then this condition is called protogyny, and these two conditions in which anther and stigma do not synchronize with each other, and in such cases there is only chance for cross pollination. There is only cross pollination to occur. Now another device is self-sterility or self-incompatibility. It is very much clear that self-incompatibility means stigma is not compatible with its own pollen. That means this is a genetic mechanism that prevents self-pollen from the same flower or other flower of the same plant when self pollen grain falls on the stigma, stigma do not receive it. So this prevents its own pollen grains from fertilizing the ovule by inhibiting pollen germination or pollen tube growth in the pistil. So if the flowers are self-incompatible, then stigma does not allow pollen grain to grow and to germinate, and pollen tube growth will not take place in the pistil. It takes place in tobacco and some crucifer plant. Even though flower is bisexual, both male and female flowers are present on the same plant, but if they are not self-incompatible, then there is only chance for cross pollination. Heterostyle. Within the flower, the style and stamens are at different height. Sometimes there will be long style and short stamen, and sometimes short style and long stamens. So they are at different heights. Then pollen sometimes does not fall onto the stigma, or pollen stigma पर नहीं आएगा, even though the flowers is bisexual, and there is only possibility of cross pollination. Next device for cross pollination is hercogamy. It is the presence of natural and physical barrier between androecium and gynoecium which prevents self pollination and carry out cross pollination. What are the advantages of cross pollination? Since in the cross pollination two different flowers are involved of two different plants, this is the breeding between two genetically different plants. So it introduces genetic recombination, and hence it brings variations in the progeny, in the offsprings. If there is variations, it increases the ability of the offsprings to adapt to a various change in the environment. That means it develops vigor and makes the offsprings very much fertile. So during self-fertilization, this vigor and fertility is lost, but here vigor and fertility is maintained, and the progeny becomes more adapted to the changes in the environment. They can tolerate the stress in the environment and they can survive. Defective characters of race eliminated, and it is replaced by a better character, and since it is the root cause for variation, so it brings about evolution also. So it is the raw material for evolution, because continuous variation and useful variations are selected by nature and it causes evolution. What are disadvantages of cross pollination? First one, there will be need of enormous amount of pollen grains, because pollen grains has to transfer from one flower to the another flower of the different plant. So there may be a loss of enormous amount of pollen grains on the way during its transfer. So the flower has to produce a huge number of pollen grains, so that the probability of pollination and fertilization be ensured. Second, involvement of pollinating agents, chance factor is more, because pollen grains has to transfer from the anther of one flower to the another flower of different plant. So there may be involvement of pollinating agents or pollinators will be more in cross pollination. So these are the disadvantages, and let us see what are the agents of pollination. We have discussed in earlier classes also. There will be two agents, abiotic agents and biotic agents. Abiotic agents, there may be wind and water, anemophily and hydrophily. Biotic agency like insects, entomophily, birds, ornithophily, bats, chiropterophily. If animal is the pollinators, then it is called zoophily, and one more is there, malacophily. Malacophily, if pollinator is who? Snail. If pollinator is snail, then it is called malacophily. So these are all biotic agencies and these are abiotic agencies. What are the characteristics of insect pollinated plants or flower? The flowers in insect pollinated plants कैसा होगा? First of all, pollens. Its pollen will be sticky or spiky so that it can easily stick to the insect's body. Second one, petals will be brightly colored and scented also so that it can attract the insects. Third one, its stamen will be inside the flower so that insect can sit on that and pick up the pollen. Some of the insects eat the pollen or consume the pollen, and some of the insects suck the nectars, so there will be presence of nectar in the flower and it will attract the insects. So such insects which sucks the nectar or consume the pollen are called as nectar or pollen robbers. They are called as pollen robbers. Such insect which attract the insect, and insects eat or consume the pollens and sucks the nectar, such insects are called nectar or pollen robbers, isn't it? And fifth one, the stigma will be sticky in nature so that when insect brush up, the pollen stick to it easily. So there are these features: pollen will be sticky in nature, petals will be brightly colored and scented so that it can attract the insects, stamen will be inside the flower, it will have nectars to attract the insects, and stigma will be sticky so that it can attract, so that the pollen can stick to it. Now there is a relation between two organisms, yucca plant and moth. There will be a mutualistic relationship between these two organisms. There is a mutualistic relationship between let us see insect pollinated plants. What are the characteristic features of the flowers in insect pollinated plants? First of all, the pollen should be sticky or spiky so that it can easily stick to the insects' bodies. Second one, petals will be brightly colored and scented So fragrance will be there to attract the insects. Some flies and beetles. Flies and beetles are attracted to the flower by its which fragrance? Foul fragrance. Foul fragrance. So these are attracted towards the flower by its foul fragrance, flies and beetles. So flowers will be brightly colored and scented so that it can attract insects, isn't it? Third one, the stamens are inside the flower. Stamens are inside the flower so that insect will brush past them and pick up the pollen. Some of the insects consume pollens and some of the insects consume nectar, sucks nectar. So there will be presence of nectars, also sweet nectars. So such insects which consume pollens or nectars are known as pollens or nectar robbers. Pollen or nectar robbers. Such insects are called pollen or nectar robbers because they either consume the pollens or sucks the nectar. So nectars and pollens are the reward to them. Now next one is stigma. How will stigma be? Stigma will also be sticky so that when pollen reaches to it, pollen can easily stick to it, isn't it? Here the relationship between two organisms, yucca plant and moth, there is mutualism or symbiotic relationship between these two plants, and they cannot complete their life cycle without each other. How? The moth deposits its egg in the locules of the ovary of yucca plant flower. In turn, yucca plant gets pollinated. Yucca plants get pollinated with this moth. So both are benefited from each other and both cannot complete their life cycle without each other. So larvae of the moth come out of the egg as the seed starts developing. Now what are the characteristic features of wind pollinated flower? Wind pollinated flowers are different in structure because they do not have to attract insects, but they do need to be exposed to the wind. उनको wind में expose होना है so that it can easily be blown away with the wind. So what about pollen grains of the flower? Pollen grain will be small and light weighted, and there will be huge number of pollen grains in the flower so that pollination will be ensured by reaching to the stigma of the another flower with the wind. Second one, the anther must be exposed to the wind so that pollen can easily be blown away. Third one, stigma are feathery to catch. Stigma should be feathery so that it can catch the pollen which is carried with wind. 4, there is no scent or no nectar because it does not have to attract insects. And next one, petals. Petals are small, green, as there is no need to attract insects. So the flower may be dull colored. There is no need of bright colors. So the flower may be dull colored. So petals may be green or it may be small. If the flowers are small, it will be packed into an inflorescence, and there will be single ovule in each ovary. There is a common example of wind pollination. like maize, corn cob. Tassel of corn cob represents stigma and style in pistillate corn cob flower. As maize is monoecious plant, that means both male and female flowers develops on the same plant. So tassel represents stigma and style in the pistillate flower. You can see the anthers are well exposed to the wind and the stigma is feathery. Here we can see that in insectimate they are brightly colored flowers, and stamens are inside the flowers, and it has nectar, so it can attract the insects. What is mode of transport of male gamete to the female gamete in algae, bryophyta and pteridophyta? In bryophyta and pteridophyta, male gamete is transferred or carried to the female gamete with water. Female flower reach the surface of water by its long stalk, and male flower or its pollen grains are released on the surface of water to carry out pollination. क्या होता है कि फीमेल फ्लावर वाटर के सरफेस तक पहुंच जाते हैं अपने लॉन्ग स्टॉक से, यू कैन सी इन दिस, एंड मेल फ्लावर्स रिलीजेज इट्स पॉलन ग्रेन्स, और ये खुद भी वाटर सरफेस पर पहुंच करके दोनों पॉलिनेशन कैरी आउट करते हैं. इट कैन बी सीन इन वेलिस्नेरिया एंड हाइड्रिला. इन सी ग्रासेस like Jostera, female flowers are submerged in the water. Female flowers are submerged in water, and pollens are also released inside the water. So cross pollination can easily be carried out inside the water in Jostera, because female flowers and pollens both are inside the water, and it can easily be pollinated. Here we'll have very quick recap. Cross pollination is the transfer of pollen grain from anther of one flower to the stigma of different flower of another plant or of the same or different species. If it is also called allogamy. If the pollination takes place between two genetically different plants, then it is called genogamy. What are the devices of cross pollination? There are devices of cross pollination like declining, dichogamy, self-sterility, heterostyly, hercogamy. And there are the advantages of cross pollination as it introduces genetic recombination, it increases vigor and fertility in the offsprings, and defective characters of the race gets eliminated and better character replaces it, and it is the raw material for evolution. A disadvantage यही है कि इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा pollen grains की जरूरत पड़ती है, और यहाँ pollinating agents are also very much needed to carry out the pollination process. And the agents of pollination क्या क्या हैं? Wind and water हैं. Wind जहाँ more common है abiotic factor के लिए, और water is very rare, quite rare in flowering plants. It is limited to about 30 genera only, mostly in monocotyledon plants. And biotic agencies are insect, birds and bats, animals और snails, malacophily. Insect pollinated plants जो है उसके pollen sticky होंगे, petals brightly colored होंगे, scented होंगे, stamen inside the flower होंगे, और nectar present होंगे, stigma भी sticky होंगे, और यूका और मोथ में एक symbiotic relationship है, जिसमें क्या यूका प्लांट मोथ से pollinated हो जाते हैं, और मोथ जो है अपना एग यूका प्लांट के फ्लावर्स के ओवरी की और लोक्यूल्स में अपना एग डिपॉजिट करते हैं. एंड द कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स ऑफ विंड पॉलिनेटेड फ्लावर्स आर दैट इट इज मोर कॉमन इन ग्रास. पॉलन ग्रेन्स इसके स्मॉल होंगे, लाइट वेट होंगे, ड्राई होंगे. देयर विल बी वेरी लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पॉलन ग्रेन्स. एंथर जो है वेल एक्सपोज्ड होंगे, सो दैट इट कैन इजीली बी कैरिड अवे विथ विंड. स्टिग्मा जो फेदरी होंगे, सो दैट इट कैन कैच द pollen grain easily. there will be no scent, no nectar in the flower. The flower will be dull colored. There is no need of color in the petal, no need of attracting insects. If the flowers are small, it will be packed into the inflorescence, and there will be single ovule in each ovary. Male inflorescence जो tassels है, tassels of corn cob represent stigma and style in pistillate flower. Water pollination it's very more common in lower plants like algae, bryophyta and pteridophyta. It is quite rare. Water pollinations can be seen in Vallisneria, Hydrilla, Zostera. So in the next section we will study about pollen pistil interaction and double fertilization. Okay.